to make a small correction, it's going to be Tom Grillo who will be presenting the talk today from Particles Plus. And Tom has been working in the particle measurement industry since 1992, and he will be sharing his work at Particles Plus during this presentation. Go ahead, Tom.
Hello, everyone. Tom Grillo with Particles Plus. I manage sales as well as tech support, technical writing. I've been in the air movement and indoor air quality marketplace and ambient air marketplace since the early 90s, and defense electronics before that. Today, what we'd like to share is our industry perspective on why particle size matters. We all here understand how we measure particles today with indications in PM, and we wanted to share some insight into this with potentially some new sensors that we're bringing forth into the market that will provide low cost but very high quality, high accuracy and repeatability in data for your research and for your studies. All right, so particle matter has been measured and reported for ambient and indoor air quality, for pollution, site monitoring, even industrial hygiene applications as mass per volume, micrograms per cubic meter, as we do for many other gases and other gases and pollutants in the air, whether it be indoor or outdoor. However, recently, and especially with COVID and some other things that have been happening, recent events causing a drastic change in the indoor air quality control reveal how ineffective this can be, with countless studies being reported and ventilation systems being overhauled in commercial buildings and institutions. We have facilities that are taking MERV 8 and converting them up to MERV 13 or up to MERV 16 filtration systems, and having to do drastic changes to these systems to accommodate the increased static, to be able to maintain the same level of air quality and airflow. And it's become a really big concern as to what the particulates look like in those spaces. And you know, when we're just looking at a PM 2.5 reading or a PM 10 reading, if it was more of a occupational health and safety requirement, you know, these things can change drastically based on how we change our systems. So trying to understand distribution is important. We understand the potential health hazards and effects from particulates and how these increase the smaller the size of particles within the normal log distribution in the environment exists. This is obviously in countless papers you can find on the EPA website, as well as through the industrial hygiene community, all the papers that have been shared and the research that's been done on the smaller the particle, the more hazard it is to your health. Providing more detail and resolution with sizing the particulates within the PM indication should also be important. Particle counters versus photometers when we're talking about a low cost or even a medium standard measurement device, whether it be in a citywide network or a large network, as we had presented to us by Carl from NASA with their RAMP program, something along the lines of a photometer that has a low end capability. Mass is inferred from the DC light level, the calibration value, and sometimes user correction and density refractivity can be applied. Whereas a particle counter, the mass is calculated based on the estimated average size of the particles in a size channel. So the less channels you have, the less accurate your approximation of mass is going to be. The more channels you have, the more accurate it's going to be. All right, so the sizes are converted to a volume of the particles that are counted, and sometimes it can include, and with our products it can include and does include by channel size, the density and refractivity correction capability. So again, why does size matter? The amount of light that's scattered by a particle, and this is in any of these light scattering devices, whether it's a photometer or a particle counter, the light scattered is a function of its surface, okay, while the mass is a function of its volume. So there is a significant error between the amount of scattered light and the particulate mass, or basically what we're calling radius divided by 3. If we take a mixture of particle sizes and calculate both the scattered light and the volume for these, we can see the error between these is very substantial. So if you look at the calculation for the area of a sphere versus the volume of a sphere, and then mathematically calculate it out, we basically wind up with error being R divided by 3, which can be significant. Now, calibrating out this discrepancy, which when we talk about normalizing data and using reference from other devices in a network, can be useful, but calibrating out the discrepancy of the 2.5 channel, for example, doesn't solve this issue in a specific device, right? Not on the network, but in the device itself, since the error is a function of the radius and not a constant factor. You can't simply calibrate it out with a PM correction factor that doesn't consider size distribution. In the corrected table below, we can see that correcting one size doesn't correct all the other sizes. Size distribution is crucial to converting scattered light to mass. So if we were to correct out for the 2.5, PM 2.5 here, and bring that to an error of 0, you can see the effect that that normalized calibration factor would have against all of the other smaller particles, which again can have a greater impact on that PM 2.5 value. Photometers are looking at a cloud of particles, and not all particles in the cloud are scattering light from their total area. They can be completely impacted by the beam, since other particles may be blocking the beam. And not all scattered light will escape the cloud, right? So in other words, the particles may block some of the other scattered light. Add to that the difficulty in controlling the uniformity of the beam and the difficulty of controlling the velocity of all the particulates in the chamber. The amount of scattered light in these sensors becomes a very crude estimate for particle mass. And again, I'm speaking to low-cost photometers, not higher quality photometers that have a lot more technology built into them. PM is a very limited indicator of air quality. In the table below, each row will yield the same value for PM 2.5. So 1953.2 micron particles yield the same as PM values of a single 2.5 micron particle. Fine and ultrafine particulates have a significantly higher health impact, which we know from all the various studies on nanoparticles and ultrafines. Providing a list of PM values for different sizes helps to address the issue, but requires a sensor that can accurately size them. Size distribution is found to be increasingly critical in many health studies. Having some means of measuring this in the near future will likely be necessary for air quality sensors for ambient air monitoring. Size distribution varies significantly with respect to many factors. Concerns from many users over measurement accuracy, as we've heard in the previous presentations, different governments, academia, citizen scientists, researchers like yourselves. Data normalization in the cloud can't compensate for poor data, and which is something I would definitely discuss and debate. Sensor sensitivity thresholds can be misleading, as well as there is no calibration standard for air quality sensors when we're talking about these low-cost monitors. And speaking of standards, when we look to the international standard for optical particle counters, or OPCs, I'm not going to go into great depth here. We have a lot of papers that cover this, as well as the international standards document itself can discuss this. But you can see that there's many aspects to how these things are calibrated and their traceability. And this is all necessary so that you have the uniformity in the industry from manufacturer to manufacturer, let alone in the past how it used to be difficult for just one manufacturer to have one model match the same model from a same production line. So we've come a long way with this. Benefits of a robust calibration is that the sensor results are accurate, repeatable, and stable over an extended defined period. Below are two instruments calibrated and simultaneously sampling room air. And if you see the different sizes that we're categorizing here, in the smaller sizes where you have the homogeneity of the smaller particles based on the log distribution of the room air, you can see that we're tracking fairly close between two instruments. As we saw earlier, discussed earlier, specific PM values only tell us the total mass of particulates smaller than the PM target. It tells us nothing about the size distribution of those particulates. Increasingly, people are interested in the size distribution, and especially of the fine and ultrafine particulates. So what could we do? And again, I'm posing this to the community. what can we do to provide some idea of size distribution without creating an entirely new air quality metric? Right now, we're reporting in micrograms per cubic meter for PM, but what if we had something where we were modifying that so that it's the PM value, but with a distribution note or something about that distribution? I think that's something that needs to be considered and looked at, and obviously coming to you and to the researchers to weigh in on that. One of the things that we're doing as a company, and again, because my part of this is a commercial presentation, I want to tell you about our new air care monitor, the 9301P OEM. This is going to be the heart of many new systems and disruptor products to provide a low-cost 30-channel particle counter that will provide PM with a much tighter accuracy for the approximation of mass. The details can be found on our site. Yes?
Time to wrap up.
And that was it, literally. That was my last slide. Thank you so very much.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom. That was a very interesting presentation, and thanks for talking a lot about the science of particle measurement and issues with current measurements. I have a couple of questions for you. Number one is that the lower size detection limit appears to be about 0.3 microns for most optical particle sizers, at least in the range that are used, like your instrument. But a lot of fresh combustion emissions, diesel vehicle emissions, gasoline vehicle emissions are smaller than 0.3 microns. So how do you see trying to measure those in the sensor space?
I see that being done with, again, similar lower cost versions of what's out there now today for ultrafine count. So where we can couple something like a 30-channel instrument that we were showing here with another low-cost device that is looking at everything below that threshold, but again, in a lower cost package than is traditionally offered in the marketplace today, so that we can provide as an industry, we can provide to the researchers and to the scientists the tools so that they can have down into the submicron, down into the nanometer range, and as well as up to, say, 25 microns, as we can do with our current optical devices.
Okay. I don't know how much more time we have, but one more question would be that I think Carl presented about the humidity effects on PM sensors, and particles grow depending on their composition. So if you do sizing by optical sizing, do you think that there needs to be some sort of humidity pre-treatment for these measurements to ensure that humidity doesn't interfere with your sizing?
Absolutely. The last slide that I had up with my thank you showed one of our outdoor air quality monitors enclosures, and the long inlet is a heated inlet. And so we do, for our sensors in particular, and I do agree, yes, you do need to control the hygroscopic effects of humidity. The same air monitors, and this is going back to the discussion of outdoor versus indoor and the application to indoor. In the indoor space, it's not as big of an effect for the particle counting, but it still is something to be considered. There are a lot of papers that were done by one of our competitors in the space, TSI, which is very informative. It was really good research on hygroscopic effect of humidity effects on particles and how it grows them. It's a good resource. I don't mind mentioning it. But yes, hygroscopic effects need to be addressed. When you're talking about a low-cost outdoor network, you need to consider having a heated inlet to accommodate and to alleviate that if you want reliable, accurate data. Our goal as Particles Plus is we're trying to come out with a product that's going to be a disruptor product, providing the same type and that level of control, hygroscopic control, and accuracy and distribution and resolution, but again, at a very low cost that lets us knock out these other lower cost sensors that are, basically using air filter photometers, but are being considered the low cost alternative in these sensor networks. We're looking to provide some accuracy, repeatability, and reliability for the space, and that's why we've stepped into this realm.
Great. Thank you, Tom.